How did this project begin and how it changed along the way? I think this project really began much earlier than this exhibition. Even in my earlier works, I was already interested in materiality, the physical qualities of material, and how they could shape a work beyond simply carrying an image. Over the years, my practice shifted towards imprinting, image transfer, and traces of places. I was using symbols of colonial history, especially during the American colonial period, wherein they left this several sports along with healthcare and education, of course. But there's this basketball game and volleyball, and I was making rubbings out of found objects and even creating a full scale of my grandmother's house. So instead of trying to produce an image, I become more interested in making the process visible. The scratches that comes from my series of portraitures, I take those, and also from my Makahiya series, which is the actual scratching of the surface, the scratched out cut, and the marks of abrasions. And these layers aren't just techniques, they become a record of time, labor, and touch. And the surface carries the history of how the work was made. And throughout the works that are produced in this exhibition, you'll notice vessels or containers. These are appearing throughout the exhibition. So I'm interested in objects that once held something, but have since been discarded. In a way, they relate also to chairs because chairs somewhat carries weight, and it is also mass produced, especially here in the Philippines and throughout nearby countries, neighboring countries in Asia. So both of these are containers of some sort. They support and they carry and they retain traces of our use. Paper also became central to this body of work. I used handmade paper, uh, Manila paper, washi, Japanese paper, even recycled ones and used, and almost paper that are very much common for this particular series of work, and like leftover papers. In other group of works, I combined termite soil as well, and also standalone sculptures that also have traces and imprints on it. Uh, at some point, I realized that I wasn't really trying to represent things anymore. I became more interested in what happens when materials are pushed, worn down, scratched, and layered and allowed to change over time. Number two, how does where you live influence what you make? I live in Bogo in the northern part of Cebu Island, where everyday life is closely connected to both land and sea. Like across culture, people there are constantly making, creating, repairing is also part of that activity, and adapting things like activities such as boat making, boat being repaired. These vessels are being repaired. Houses are built using whatever materials are available. Traditionally, furniture is fixed instead of being thrown away. Growing up around that way of living really shaped how I think about materials today. Looking back, I think that's one of the biggest influence of my practice. I'm interested on those quiet, everyday acts of repair because it somehow reveals how people live with materials over time. The landscape itself is also constantly changing due to weather disturbances, um, agricultural and human activities. And Those slow transformations continue to influence how I think about making work. So rather than focusing on historical events, I'm drawn to slower processes like erosion, repair, residue, and the subtle ways that people leave evidence of their presence. Number three, why these materials? People sometimes ask why I particularly use these materials. For me, I'm drawn to materials that already carry histories, even if those histories are very ordinary. Paper is fragile, but it is also surprisingly resilient. It can preserve something, but it can also tear, disappear, or change over time. Termite soil fascinates me because termites represent both construction and decay at the same time. Termites, just like tools, the everyday objects, just like tools, wherein people are using tools throughout the history of humanity, wherein it's all been used to build and at the same time to destroy what we have built. And I don't really think that these materials, as passive supports, they become like collaborators. They absorb marks, resist certain gestures, and sometimes they even fail. And also, going back to paper, not only acts as a passive support, they become like collaborators. They absorb marks, resist certain gestures, and sometimes they even fail. I actually like the unpredictability. I don't want complete control over the material, to have less control of the actual material. I think that sense of fragility and precarity is part of what gives the work its life. Number four, how do historical references function in your practice? I don't really think of myself as illustrating history. I'm more interested how history survives in everyday materials and objects. So it's more in my fascination with the material culture. It appears through architectural remnants like found materials, local practices, territorial markings, and acts of repair. Material culture has become really important foundation in my practice. Sometimes I think about the work almost like a form of material archaeology, me being maybe a practice of a pseudo archaeologist, not trying to reconstruct the past, but paying attention to what remains and what disappears and what continues to shape the present. Number five, how has repetition become productive in your work? So repetition is both physical process and a way of thinking. I spend a lot of time scratching, cutting, layering, and rubbing surfaces to somehow create a particular effect and also create a trace in a surface. So individual gestures is actually very small, but over time they accumulate together. They become a record of time and labor. So people sometimes ask why I scratch the surface too much. And it's a way of somehow even up to the point of destroying the paper. Those repetitive action also connects to to much older human gestures and survival, like scratching a bark of tree, carving into a surface, digging into the earth, tilling, um, or leaving marks to remember a place or to claim a territory. Number six, what kind of encounter do you hope viewers have? Of course, I don't expect people to arrive on one singular expectation or interpretation. What I really hope is that they spend some time with the work, and initially maybe they begin to notice the materials first, and then the labor, then the slow accumulation of marks. If they start to sense sort of this tension between fragility and resistance, and between holding something together and allowing um, the materials or the work to fall apart, then I think the work has done something meaningful. Ultimately, I hope that the exhibition encourages people to think about the materials, the everyday things, places, and even our own bodies carry memory, not as something fixed or linear, but something that is constantly changing and shifting.